Breakthroughs are not always very easy. Sometimes they come with a long, difficult, painful process. And before we go back into prayer, I feel like I need to encourage us around the concept of breakthrough. You can just make yourself comfortable for a second, but it won't be very long. We are a church that prays. And the beauty about a church that prays means that we also get to see breakthroughs. A lot of you heard on Sunday, there's been breakthroughs after another in Pastor Dorso's health with recovery. He is concerned for you. He's already thinking about, well, he probably never stopped thinking about you knowing Pastor Dorso. But just his care, even to worry about tonight's prayers, rain outside. There's a little bit of a crazy wind that might go on a little bit later on. And can we just give God some praise for a pastor that loves his church and prays for this church? I also love that this church is not so self-centered to just focus about here, but that Pastor Jordan has been taking some time to go to Eswatini and actually expand in partnership, just growing multiple care points, more children, more people coming to experience the presence of God. I had this thought on breakthrough that I've been thinking about for a few weeks already. And it's actually been taking me to the story of Jericho, the fall of Jericho. And I know a lot of you went to a worship night last night. And I was like, man, he's talking about Jericho. And I was going to do that tonight. Just in case you guys, there was a event at the UBS Arena and the pastor was speaking on Jericho, but complete different story. He made reference to it. But this story that I want to touch on and hopefully is going to steer your faith when it comes to breakthrough is on the story of the fall of Jericho. And you probably know the story. The Israelites had been given a promise to take on the promised land. And they come to this fortified stronghold city called Jericho. Thick walls, tall walls. And apparently in my research, that was not very common for cities at that time to do. So this particular city bared an extra challenge for the Israelites to actually break into their promise. God told Joshua, you are going to take this city. And why the story is so popular is because what we know from the story is that the Israelites actually end up marching around the city. And then after marching around the city for some time, the exact instruction was walk around the city one time for 6 days. And then on the seventh day, walk around the city 7 times, scream, and I will give you the city. I'm a man that asks questions. And I know we shouldn't be asking God questions, but sometimes there's processes involved that actually can teach us some things. And there's some things that I found in that process that were highly encouraging, and they actually might be encouraging for you tonight. For whatever it is that you're going through and that you're praying for, that God is going to give a breakthrough. And I want to take you to this verse. And this verse is the 8th verse. And it says, after Joshua spoke to the people, the 7 priests with the ram's horns started marching in the presence of the Lord, blowing the horns as they marched. And the ark of the Lord's covenant followed behind them. This is just the process. God had instructed Joshua, and they were starting the process to march around Jericho. And God was going to give his people Jericho. And the priests are blowing the ram's horn. What I thought was a little odd, or in my research that I thought was odd, was that the horn actually resembled the call for attack. But in the call for attack, God doesn't have his people go right at the challenge to enforce the breakthrough. But instead, what happens is the Israelites are walking around their challenge. They're walking around their challenge in a circle. I know you guys are wondering where I'm at. Yes, I'm walking around the middle section right here. Walking around the challenge only so that they can find themselves in the exact same spot where they started off on. Has any one of you ever been praying for a breakthrough and you feel like you're spinning in circles? You feel like nothing is happening? You're wondering to yourself, what am I doing? Maybe you've considered, man, this doesn't even make any sense anymore. I want to give up. Even though there was a call for battle, God diverted them around the challenge. Not just once, not just twice, several times. But then there's something else that I thought was interesting. And maybe this is going to give you some encouragement. It says in that verse, the seven priests with the ram's horn started marching in the presence of the Lord. Hang on. Even though they weren't coming straight for the challenge, even though they weren't experiencing the breakthrough in that wall that they really needed, and they were walking around the problem, here I go again, walking around. Where was the presence of the Lord? If you feel stuck and walking around your situation, be assured that the presence of the Lord is still with you. Sometimes we think just because we're not seeing breakthrough, we automatically associate that with a lack of the presence of the Lord. No, that is not true. Even though you're not experiencing what God has promised to you, doesn't mean that He has abandoned you or walked away from you. But instead, He's walking every single step around the challenge that you're facing. And then what happens? On the seventh day, the Israelites walk around the city 7 times. I was like, I actually am curious how big Jericho was. I did some research and there's vague numbers. The lowest number that I could find all around Jericho, that walk, if they were apparently, according to researchers, walking, shoulders grinding against the wall about a mile and a half. It's a fortified city that is actually trying to defend itself, so you probably wouldn't be walking right against the wall. Let's speculate a mile and a half. 7 times walking around in one day. Do the math. 10 and a half. Some of you guys are familiar to countryside in that area, in that region. There's a difference between taking a walk on a New York City sidewalk or hiking in the mountains, loaded with stuff, the covenant of the ark. All right, I would just so that you have a comparison, I think a half marathon is 13.1 miles. Maybe somewhat what the Israelites actually experienced that day. What I thought is odd is they walk around the city 7 times, and on the 7th time, the ram's horn is being blown. They shout, the walls fall down, and the people that had just walked around the city are actually now attacking the city. What would you want to do after you just finished a 10, 12, 13 mile hike? What is it that you would want to do in that particular moment? You probably wouldn't want to get into a fight that is life and death. Because you know exactly that you're at a point of exhaustion and tiredness and weakness. When does God come through with His promise? Sometimes in our weakest moments. Sometimes when the struggle, not prayed once, not prayed twice. I don't know how many times you've prayed for a breakthrough. But we know our God's never late. Always right on time. And then also something that I thought was interesting is we have become a culture that we scream when we celebrate something. The Israelites were screaming before they had anything to celebrate. How many of you are believing in breakthroughs and that God still does breakthroughs now these days? I don't know what your Jericho is. I don't know what wall it is that needs to come down. But what we are going to do tonight is we're going to pray for some of those breakthroughs. And we pray for God's will, and we pray for God to move. And if God answers, great, wonderful. If He doesn't answer, guess what? We're gonna keep praying. Because the only thing that we can do is quitting. And when we quit, we won't walk into our promise. We have stacks of prayer requests from our church family, loaded and plastered with healing requests for God to move upon cancer and leukemia and difficult, unhealable diseases. Limited situations, and it's not as easy as just taking a pill and it's gonna go away. No, we are believing in breakthroughs for healing tonight. And I love this about this church, that it was established that guess what? Next Wednesday, where are we gonna be? Just like the Israelites, they kept showing up outside that city to take that loop around. Next Wednesday, we're gonna be back in here and we're gonna pray again. But let's make tonight count. Can we do that? Can we make tonight count? Can we stand up on our feet and can we start going in and starting to petition for breakthroughs on behalf of our church family?